The date is Friday, September 19th, and you're listening to Entertain This, a thought-provoking podcast encapsulating all things entertainment. Fantasy is a genre of literature made famous for its expansive worlds, relatable characters, and deep understanding of the hero's journey. For that reason, it's no surprise that the fantasy genre has gained an almost cult following, with its many books and even games like Dungeons & Dragons. But with fans of anything, so too comes Hollywood, looking to make a quick buck off our favorite stories. So listen in today as Michael walks us through the good, the bad, and the ugly of fantasy Hollywood adaptations. And enjoy! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to your favorite show on the internet, encapsulating all things entertainment. It's Entertain This.
Entertain This.
This week on the show, I have some exciting news, and it's unfortunate that this is an audio-based podcast because we actually got something really interesting in the mail, and I'll talk about it, but I can't show it, obviously, because this is an audio platform. But we've gotten a weird package from a fan of the show from far off lands of Quebec in the white cold, if you would. He says he's some sort of an inventor and claims inside of this box is a time machine, which I think is wild. But so let me get it out of the box real quick. I'm just gonna hold on. Let me see if I can.
Prize like it didn't come. It just came in like a cardboard box.
Just cardboard box. Oh, there's some like paper that's wrapped around it to protect it, I guess. Let me just get that off there. Okay, that's gone. Okay, here it is. Yeah, it's a metal box. It's got some buttons on it, and let me see. Just kind of put in a random date
this
here.
Thing like live. On
trying it. Is that okay?
Podcast. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna hit this big red button. Are we good?
Yep.
Okay, here it comes. What? Ah!
Oh no!
Are we okay? Are we all okay?
Yeah. I think I lost my arm.
Oh no. Yeah, you're just like, it's not even bleeding. It's just like as though we're never there. It's just like a nub now. Gone. That's wild, man. I'm sorry that happened to you. It seems like a fine place. It's pretty wooded and kind of like a rainforesty area. It's hot. It's kind of humid here.
I know. It's just a bad day to wear a sweatshirt.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're just going to kind of continue on with the episode now and hope that this doesn't impact us later on.
All right. Yeah. I'll just try and forgive any sounds of swatting mosquitoes throughout the podcast.
Yeah, it's weirdly quiet in this forest, though. Like, there's no sound of forest at all. We're just here, and you have to believe us, which is wild.
It is pretty crazy how it, like, took our entire, like, recording setups with us.
Yeah.
Like, it's just incredibly convenient.
Yeah, and we're all recording remotely, mind you. So it took our whole computers with us, and we're actually not together. We're, like, a far distance away from each other.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the bit for this week. Michael, do you have an episode for us?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so I just wanted to I've been consuming a lot more media lately.
Good for you.
My preferred domain of fantasy inspired series, whether that
dating simulators.
No.
Oh,
no.
I've seen your stream list.
Life Simulator 2020.
Monster Dater 42.
Oh gosh.
Madden 23.
No,
I don't know if that one's a dating sim.
That one is an incredibly complex dating sim. They keep releasing. It's like this.
It's a dating sim. It's a dating sim, but you really have to make the story yourself. Like, it is not clear at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's the entirety of what the my career part of that game is.
It's a dating sim, but it never seems to work out in your favor.
No, unless you set it to rookie mode, and it's just ugh.
Everybody
What's
wants
the
you.
point then? What's the
Yeah.
point?
Absolutely.
But no, I've not been playing more dating sims. I've been doing things like reading fantasy books and watching fantasy movies and playing fantasy games. Alex, so much cooler than dating sims.
That's just a bold-faced lie, but continue.
There's no winning.
Why
here.
do you lie to us, Michael? Come on, like you can't just can't make this.
I'll do my best, man. No, so I've been consuming like the entire spectrum of different series. Most recently, I talked in the past on this podcast about The Witcher. It was more recent to when the first season of The Witcher came out on Netflix.
Witcher, I barely know her.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And alongside of that, I'm rereading the original, like The Witcher novels and playing The Witcher games, all at the same time, just consuming all of the Witcher content that I can right now. And the thing that I'm kind of piecing together, and something that I've noticed in the past as well, is how shitty of a job Hollywood in general does at adapting fantasy stories. Especially when compared to the original works. And I kind of wanted to, like, this is just a phenomenon that I've noticed, and not one that hasn't been talked about in the media before. It's definitely like any passionate fan of any original work is gonna throw stones and curse at the sky at any bad adaptation. So you've all heard about how some of this stuff is just not that good. But I feel like I wanted to like take a step back, examine alongside my two wonderful co-hosts here what exactly a good and a bad adaptation is for a fantasy series. And I just hope you can listen along with us and just entertain this.
Music just played. Yeah, so this is music on top of music, and it's awesome. I want to define fantasy first because there's so many adaptations out there.
Mhm.
I want to make sure that I'm in the right ballpark when we start playing ball. So what exactly do we mean to fantasy to that extent?
Yeah, so for me, when I was thinking on this subject, I was thinking of like the more popular, like medieval fantasies, like what it can range from low to high fantasy. Like, so as an example, like Lord of the Rings, I would consider like medium to high fantasy. I consider like The Witcher like more of a low to medium fantasy, and like Game of Thrones would be more of like a low fantasy that then like slowly becomes mid fantasy.
So we're talking like D&D.
Yeah, like D&D-esque. Yeah.
We're talking like Dungeons, Dragons, bars, perhaps mead, if you would.
What about
tavern
maidens?
here or there?
Fair maidens, touch some grass.
Fair maidens, yeah.
Those who are maidenless.
It's one of my favorite things that I'm so glad stuck with you from the Elden Ring episode.
Yeah, people can be maidenless, and y'all need to touch some grass. Like those have become societal staples that I get to participate in strictly because of Michael's interference in my life.
I love it. I love my horrible influence that I've had on you.
It's great.
But no, so those are like really the three examples that I wanted to take a look at, and a lot of this is kind of like just looking at it from the holistic perspective of where these works come from. All of them come originally from books, from single authors that then get run through the process of Hollywood to be output to us in whatever way people on different boards and directors and writers get to choose is the best way for us.
Yay.
Yeah. So are there like, so those are the three that I want to talk about, but are there any sort of like when we talk about this topic of, I couldn't think of a better word for it, but Hollywoodification of a series or an original work that you two know of that comes to mind that has irked your gears in the past?
Are you talking about fantasy in general, or can we expand to the comic?
You can expand.
So...
I think for what I want to, for my stuff I want to talk about is more fantasy focused. But yeah, if there's like just a bad adaptation that y'all can think of, like, is there any that immediately come to mind?
Yeah, the Percy Jackson for sure.
Oh yeah, that was
bad. But I'm sorry, I interrupted Pat rudely. What was
I was
yours?
just gonna say Marvel in general. This like
What?
dude, they have over
Ooh, that is a
every
contentious
What?
topic.
We could get into this later in just its own episode.
Do
but
we need to do another Marvel episode? Because
I
we've
think
done
because
so many.
I think because we got a new perspective now that's apparently full of just
That's
all the
apparently
spice.
wrong, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
I don't know
we
about
need
that.
to we need to hash it out because I feel like at a fundamental level this podcast operates on a respectful basis of liking Marvel movies.
So I like Iron Man. Like, you can't say that RDJ isn't the ideal person for that character, as well as Captain Marvel. But as they've continued and grown the series, they've just, I guess, to me, they've stayed not as true to some of the comics and the original source material, and they've kind of just made stuff up. Like Black Panther, for example, he was all about Wakanda and staying, and that's all he cared about. Like, he would have never opened up Wakanda to everybody. Like, that's just not his personality. Chadwick Boseman, perfect actor. I mean, you couldn't have made a better character. I'm just saying with the writing of the material.
About this. I can't rebuttal this because it's not that episode, but this episode is. This will be next week's episode. Sorry, it's confirmed now. This is what we're talking about next week. It's just Alex versus Patrick. Can I make Patrick like Marvel? By explaining away the problems that he has.
I'm literally wearing a Deadpool shirt right now, so you can't say I don't like Marvel.
I want to talk about MCU. I want to talk about the MCU.
Yeah.
On board with what the MCU is doing. That'll be next week. It'll be changing your heart. Anyway, yeah, I don't agree with Patrick. That's a good adaptation, but whatever. But I will say that Lemony Snicket's has had a number of adaptations, and some of them are good, and some of them are not good.
That is another good example. Yeah. Which one did you like?
I liked the one with Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
It was darker, more grittier, a little bit more Tim Burton-esque. I liked it a lot more.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. So I think like the commonality there is from like a bad adaptation in my mind when it comes to like all these examples, even including a bit of like Marvel to a certain degree, even though I do disagree fundamentally with your point, Pat.
Agree to disagree.
The core fundamental part here is like adapting an original work to a completely different medium is very difficult. It is a very hard thing to do. And no one expects for any like Hollywood producer or writer or whoever's in control of these sorts of things to look at like a book like Lord of the Rings, for example, as like a good adaptation. Take a look at like those novels and be like, yes, we need to create a 1-to-1 adaptation of these books to the silver screen. It's fundamentally an impossible thing to do. You're working in a whole different medium where your actual ability to visualize a space becomes a reality, no longer exists within a reader's imagination. And because of that aspect, adaptations are hard. However, where people start to have problems with adaptations, in my mind, is when writers and producers try to insert their own ideas of what will make a work more popular to make more money. And you can take that however you will.
I have a good example.
Yeah, there's tons of great examples of this.
But one that kind of hits close to home for me is Ghost in the Shell. The live adaptation where they were like, you know what? We could make this legitimate, or we could make Scarlett Johansson the main character and make more money.
Yeah. Well, and that's a perfect example of like one of the ways that Hollywood will poorly adapt a work. It's like Ghost in the Shell is a perfect example because you have the original like movie that the whole premise of it is like, yes, these are robots, these are cyborgs in Japan in a future like nihilistic version of Japan where the main character Misato is a cyborg that was created specifically to be a police officer, but the base model is meant to be almost like a model. That was like the base inspiration of the model that she was. And it was like supposed to be based off of every description that we've ever had, like very Japanese in nature. Like she is supposed to look like a hot Japanese lady, whether that, like, for whatever reason that is in the original works, that's just how it is.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Yeah.
You got a hot Scarlett Johansson, though. I mean,
and that's the thing is, like, it's one of those cases where I can partially understand. You take the core concept of this character is supposed to be hot. Ergo, get the hottest famous actress that we can find and who will take the least amount of money for it. Scarlett Johansson. There you go.
She's hot.
She's hot. She gets the job done.
She's not Japanese. Something, a cultural appropriation, something.
Yeah. And there's just tons and tons of examples of that. And like, that's kind of what I wanted to go through on a level of offense basis. I wanted to start off light and work our way to more and more upsetting.
Oh, so this topic comes from like the powerhouse of Entertain This, which is something pissed you off.
Yeah.
Great. Let's get to that.
So
that's how this podcast was founded, because something pissed us off and we wanted to talk about it.
Yeah. So for me, like, one of the core facets of, and I'll go as far to say, like, as how Spider-Man is to your personality, Alex, Lord of the Rings is my equivalent to your Spider-Man.
I want to be clear. I was the way I was, and then I found Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Not the other way around.
In very much the same way of like how I was the way I was, and then I found Lord of the Rings, and I was like, oh, I fucking love this, and I'm attaching so much of myself to this.
Was it because you found it after already loving having two breakfasts?
I do go for a good like 8 square meals a day.
God bless.
Yeah. But no, for me, it was like, I grew up in like an era, like we all grew up in generally the same era, but like for us growing up, fantasy inspired things were kind of always around us, whether it be Star Wars or it be like the video games we played. Like even playing like Super Mario or Legend of Zelda is a great example. It's like there's these different pieces of media that are all fundamental parts of our childhood that all stem from a fantasy background. And as soon as I saw Lord of the Rings, it was like, oh, this is like the culmination of all of these concepts thrown into one, executed in the most perfect way. Granted, I didn't know at the time that it was like a 60 to 70-year-old book series is what originated most of these ideas.
Right.
Yep. But it was like, at the time, I was like, oh my God, this is everything I've ever loved in all of my favorite things. And it's so good. And it's just like, and the more that you learn about it, as far as like going back and reading the old Lord of the Rings books, you learn that it's actually an incredibly faithful adaptation. There's lots of stuff that had to be cut because those books are long as shit, and no one really enjoys hearing Tolkien describe the bark of trees for 3 pages in a row. I understand that. Not everyone's cup of tea, but it gives us a really good picture of what exactly was laid out for these films and executed really, really well. And the core tenet of why these books or why these movies did such a good job at adapting the movie or the books, is because at its core, it was faithful to the people who already loved it. These books were great. They were staples within the genre, and people love them for very specific reasons. And because of that, if you execute on those very same reasons when adapting to the film, it's going to do well. It's going to hit, and it's going to resonate with those same fans that already do love it. And if there's one thing that fans of fantasy series are really fucking good at, it is talking about the shit that they love incessantly.
Mm-hmm.
That's free marketing, baby.
That's free marketing, baby. I mean, we're making a podcast right now, so you're all welcome.
Yeah. And so we take this idea of something that was a really, really good adaptation, and let's switch that over to something very similar that was not as great of an adaptation
Of the same thing.
Of the same thing, The Hobbit. The Hobbit movies.
You can't just like you can't just do that on The Hobbit, man. The Hobbit was great. I thought it was a good movie.
Here's the thing. I thought they were good movies.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the expectation was already set. The Lord of the Rings movies are on a whole nother level. They are, for me, and I know a lot of other people out there, they sit on the pantheon of godship for fantasy movies, just on a whole nother level. And the thing is,
it basically launched the genre. I mean, a bunch of books can be attributed to the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I mean, like if we're looking at this all from a like how this genre has progressed through the years, like Lord of the Rings broke the fantasy glass ceiling that existed for the genre, for something being able to like do so well in the box office as it did. Like fantasy was always seen as this niche genre outside of random successes like Star Wars. Like compare that to the traditional winners of multiple awards, like Apocalypse Now, or another great example, La La Land, where these are movies that are tailor-made to the general audience. Remove all that shit. Throw in orcs, Ents, Sauron, wizards, hobbits, elves, a ring, Gollum, all this weird shit that like most people are not gonna like empathize with unless they've already been attached to similar things. You got a recipe for what should have been a box office failure, but ended up shattering the ceiling of the genre and just launching the entire genre into a new era of possible financial success.
I want to speak briefly on the differences between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, though.
Yeah, please.
Because I don't think adaptation is at what's questioned here.
Interesting.
The reason being, and maybe I'm wrong, because maybe they did just do a bad adaptation, but I want to throw this out there as well, just to be thinking about, is that what was appealing about Lord of the Rings was this large group of people who have incredible on-screen chemistry and off-screen chemistry.
Yeah,
that was almost it was, you know, it was magnetic. You want to be a part of it. You wanted to be there. You want to be in that adventuring party. You wanted to experience what they were experiencing, and at the same time, those actors were actually really good friends who were all like wild and crazy on the outside as well.
Yeah.
Now, The Hobbit isn't that.
No.
At its core, it is a different product being made, because it's not the come and experience this adventure with a bunch of friends. It is, hey, you guys remember that adventure with a bunch of friends? Here's the old man that happened before that.
Well, I disagree with that. Like the entire premise of The Hobbit is supposed to be this journey of Bilbo with this group of dwarves that are all supposed to be essentially already family. That the Bilbo is just kind of the odd man out, and he's supposed to be the device that you learn about this world through, and these dwarves and these people. For me, I see it more as like, and I want to clarify, I don't think The Hobbit is a straight up bad adaptation. I think it's better to qualify it as a meh adaptation. It just missed the mark of what people were expecting.
And also to that point, it wasn't, The Hobbit was written first. Am I correct?
Yeah. So background information, Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, and it's a children's story. He wrote that as an adaptation of the stories that he would tell his son while basically like reading him to sleep. These were just the stories that he told his son that he adapted into a novel. And this is actually kind of funny considering the topic. The Lord of the Rings was supposed to be a completely separate set of works from The Hobbit was not supposed to share a world at all. And that's why when we talk about like the One Ring in the case of like The Hobbit, it's never talked about as like the One Ring. It's used as just like a small little like plot device for his meeting with Gollum. But when he went to go pitch the Lord of the Rings books to different publishers, the publishers were like, no, we don't want this new series. We want more of The Hobbit. Can you give us more of The Hobbit? People love The Hobbit. Give us more of The Hobbit. And so Tolkien was like, you know what? Fine, I'll give you more of The Hobbit. Here's this one small detail from The Hobbit. Now it's the entire plot device for my next 3 books. You're welcome. And it's funny because technically The Lord of the Rings is a Hollywoodification of the original Hobbit. Like it's an adaptation and a further continuation.
It's a compromise.
It's a compromise. Yep. And that's, I guess, like maybe the word I've been trying to use for Hollywoodification. Like a lot of it is compromise. It's
yeah.
And so that's where like I think go ahead.
I was going to say, so back to my original point with The Hobbit and how it was made, the movie, that is. Lord of the Rings is this huge success, and Hollywood was like, forget The Hobbit. We don't need to talk about The Hobbit. We're just going to make Lord of the Rings. This is where the money's at. So Lord of the Rings became this centerfold for this giant fandom who loves Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah.
By the way, Lord of the Rings isn't that old. Like,
no, it came out in the early 2000s.
It's not that old.
Like it's 20 years old at this point.
Yeah. No, it's maybe a little old, but not that old.
Yeah. Well, I think the good way to like look at it is that Lord of the Rings not only became like the center point of a giant fandom, it became the center point of the entire fantasy genre for over a decade.
Understand, we mean not the movie, the book. I mean, the movie in the case in which Michael's speaking, but the book really did launch 1,000 ships.
It did.
I mean, it started D&D because it had a huge fandom behind it, and that's what Hollywood was trying to cash in on when they made the movie. It's the same as how they're making a D&D movie now.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, of course they are. But what I'm saying is, if making an adaptation is a cash grab, because it is, then making a sequel or even a prequel, especially of that same adaptation, is going to be even worse than the first almost every time.
Yeah,
because it is a more desperate cash grab.
I agree with you to a certain point, but I feel like the core tenet underlying that is how much respect they actually put into the original work in that adaptation.
I agree. And usually the first go is the strongest.
Usually. And that's where The Hobbit is such a disappointment. It's still a great movie. Like it is a good movie, but it's a disappointment nonetheless. As an example, this is mostly apparent within the second movie, Desolation of Smaug. Smaug.
With Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yep. And most people will already know what I'm going to talk about with this. Really, it comes down to like the most disappointing part of it was the unnecessary introduction of a love triangle, a very odd and strange love triangle between Keeley, who is purposefully the hot dwarf, with Toriel, played by Evangeline Lilly, an elf, and Legolas, who is never even in The Hobbit, the original book.
Huh.
What's his name? The actor for that?
Orlando Bloom.
Oh, Bloom, yeah.
Yep.
Orlando de Bloom.
Yep. And this to me is just kind of like the perfect way to dip our toes into the concept of Hollywoodification. It's this idea of Hollywood trying to compromise to a wider audience than what the original work is intending to reach. And it's in this case, it's like the whole idea of like, we must introduce a romantic aspect to the story. So that way anybody who is not a fan of all this other stuff that would bring them to this movie, it gives them something to work with, something to look forward to. It's like, you already had a huge audience. You already had all the hype in the world. You already had everyone looking forward to it. And at the end of the day, adding a love triangle drama situation to an otherwise uninterested story isn't going to pull anyone extra into it. It's only going to detract from what was already there.
So this was adaptations light.
So the thing is, with any adaptation, you're going to have different pieces introduced and taken away, just by the nature of it being someone else's version of a work. This is a case of a Hollywood studio saying, hey, this seems great and all, but we've got to appeal to this other subsection of people that aren't otherwise going to be interested in this movie. Let's drop a love triangle in here.
Yeah, no, I mean, adding in any sort of a love triangle is like a classic move in the Hollywood handbag, because the idea is, if we make this sort of bro-y movie romantic, then suddenly it becomes fun for the whole family, because women love romance is their idea.
Yeah.
Which is why you see like random romance thrown into plots that don't need it.
Right. And it kind of comes back to the whole idea of, it's like, I get the general concept of like, men like fantasy and fighting and the war stuff, and women like,
we like dating simulators
romance
too, damn it.
Yeah. At the end of it, it's like, everybody, generally most people, no matter what their gender are, fucking love Lord of the Rings and fucking love The Hobbit.
When they've seen it.
It's like, let the work stand on its own merits at what it's good at. Like, don't like try and throw your own spin on this and try and make it into something that it like is not. Granted, this is a very light version of this. Like, it doesn't take that much away from the movies. It's still like, and this kind of goes back to what you were saying, Pat. Like, they are still very good movies, but that's all despite these aspects. Despite the weird love triangle that just has no actual service to the actual outcomes of the movie.
So Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, those are adaptations to which you're saying they are annoying, but they don't piss you off. Does it get worse?
I think Lord of the Rings, great adaptation. The Hobbit, there's a little bit here that just makes me a little upset.
It makes you a little bothered, but not
but
too
it's
much.
Like, hey, like, I'm still happy to have more Lord of the Rings in my life. Like,
yeah, of course,
I'm happy about that.
So
let's move on to
how many. Hold on, how many steps are there? How many steps?
We have
into
two
this
more. Two more.
There are two. Okay, so there's. I'm okay with this. I like this adaptation, and then there's I'm okay with this adaptation, and then there's this adaptation bothers me, and then there's this pisses me off. Those are the levels that we're going down, and now we're currently on this adaptation bothers me. That's where we're at.
Like this one upsets me, but I'm not ready to go scorched earth on it yet.
All right,
fair enough.
Yeah, this is where we come back to The Witcher.
Happy birthday!
Yeah. The Witcher is, as I've talked about in a previous episode, way back in our first year of recording.
Do we get to be mean to Henry Cavill today?
No, you dare! How dare you? Why?
I was gonna say,
ever?
please do not. He's
okay.
There was one man I'd leave my wife for, that'd be him.
Trust your choice.
I just want to sit in a hot, sweaty room and build PCs with that man. Paint some Warhammer figurines. Anyways, we're talking about this is a fantasy episode.
If there was a Hollywood adaptation of Pat's life, Henry Cavill could play Lauren. He would even have them CGI out his facial hair to do so.
Exactly.
See what I did?
Exactly.
See what I did? Is the mustache? Get it?
Yep.
Anyway, continue.
The Witcher series, as I talked about, is originally a book by an author named Andrzej Sapkowski from Poland.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not like ever like, it was an extremely popular novel in Poland, but didn't really have a lot of international outreach until the Witcher games. The Witcher games were made by CD Projekt Red, same people behind Cyberpunk. They used to make very good games. Unclear now.
Owie.
But and all their fame kind of started with the Witcher games. They're fantastic adaptations of the characters, not necessarily the stories of the original novels. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the Netflix series, which was explicitly stated to be a closer adaptation to the novels than the games were. It's generally okay.
It's good to hear.
I do enjoy the TV show, and it's like I did enjoy my time actually watching the 2 seasons that are out now. Granted, the more I looked back at the books and read how these stories originally played out, I think ultimately the series did a huge disservice to the original works.
The games as well, by the way. They don't really follow the games at all either. So
yeah, no, the games basically take the characters from the books and are just like, cool, we like these concepts and this world and these characters. We're gonna make our own story. It's basically the games. But the Netflix series takes so I'll back up. The first 2 books in the Witcher series are a series of short stories turned into novels. So a lot of the different chapters and books or stories inside of these books are individually pieced together stories. And there's like some overarching narratives that are what connect the individual stories together. But there's never like a whole through line, like a plot through line through the entire through an entire novel until the like 3rd and 4th books. The Netflix series is explicitly supposed to be adaptations of the first 2 books because that's all that there really could fit into 2 like 12 episode seasons. So we have in case anyone doesn't know, you have our titular character, the Witcher, Geralt of Rivia. He is the main protagonist of the books. You have another character. These are just the 3 most important characters. You have
first off, hey, shout out to our Witcher episode. If you haven't listened to it and you want this information in a bit more detail, Michael hosted an episode on The Witcher a while back. You can go look that up.
And in that one, that is an episode explicitly about the world and lore of The Witcher. Yeah. So go check that out if you don't want this shitty diet version.
Here's a TLDR.
TLDR, you got Geralt. He's a Witcher. Witcher's a weird word. I get it. It basically just means man witch. You got Yennefer.
Man witch.
Yeah.
They couldn't do man witch. It was trademarked. Of course they couldn't do man witch.
So that's just warlock.
No, not the same, my friend.
It's a man witch.
You have not played enough D&D, my friend.
No, I'm not.
I am the man witch.
Witcher actually comes from the term those people that like go with the rods and stuff and look for water. That's where the Witcher comes from originally. That terminology.
Well, kind of. So Witcher.
Yeah,
so you got to go
the real life.
Well, the thing is, you got to go.
We
back
get it. You can Google
that. You got to go way further back than that. I talk about this in the episode, but it's an interesting thing, so I'll talk on it briefly. Witcher is actually the primarily male role, male counterpart to witch, in very much the same way that widower is the male counterpart to widow.
All right.
It is meant to go back to original hunter-gatherer roles in more ancient times, where witches were meant to stay at a specific place, like set their roots, perform like almost like the motherly deeds around their communities. Yep. And then you have the witchers. Those were supposed to be the ones who went out, the ones who leave the settlement to go hunt, to go
recruit,
do these things, where witches were much stronger in their actual ability to use magic, ability to heal, because their skill set had to be more of like a utility focus. Witchers, their entire focus is on their ability to kill. ability to track, ability to hunt, and ability to kill and bring their prey home. That's the original root definition and like original origins of Witcher. Weird fucking word.
Yeah, it's just a little bit.
Yeah,
You know, Witcher, I barely know her and whatnot.
yeah, I know.
Yeah, you know.
I think we've only used that joke specifically with the term Witcher, I think 6 or 7 times across multiple episodes of this podcast.
6 or I barely know her.
Oh my god.
17.
So that's one of the main characters. We've got 2 more. We got Yennefer, who is supposed to be Geralt's love interest. She's supposed to be one of the most powerful sorceresses in this world, and is supposed to be like a completely different side of the coin from Geralt. And then you've got Ciri. Ciri is a small girl who is promised to Geralt, not in a like romantic sense, not in a weird way, but in a like, she is going to become essentially Geralt's apprentice,
daughter, basically.
Yeah, it's the easiest way to put it. Like he is he has essentially made a promise with Destiny that he will take care of her. And just to give you an idea, the entire main ideas of the first 2 Witcher novels are surrounding the ideas of seeing Geralt performing his Witcher duties, facing moral dilemmas. It's him fighting, killing monsters, running into people, and it's the whole idea of, are people the real monsters? I don't know. It's like, pretty much. But also to go along with that, the one overarching theme across these books is the idea of destiny. What does destiny mean? And how does destiny, if destiny does exist, how does it affect someone who basically spits at destiny? Someone who doesn't give a shit about it. Someone who says that the only destiny there really is in life is for everyone is destined to die. What happens then? And it's this exploration of this nihilistic character who wears that on his sleeve and continue and seeing his process of growth through understanding that destiny is this actual real thing. So let's take that to the adaptation, The Witcher Netflix series. First off, Geralt is the main character. Almost all of what we see in the books is from like Geralt's. It's not his perspective, it's third person perspective, but he is the main focus, and most of the time it's following Geralt around. The Netflix series decided to pull a
Witcheroo?
Nope. More of a Game of Thrones here. Wanted to.
They made him have a sister, and they made him have.
Nope.
Not that bad. Characters.
Yep, the multiple character perspective.
I didn't know
narratives.
That. All right.
And along with that, they decided to take things in a weirder direction. On top of that, let's go ahead and mix timelines without ever clarifying when shit is happening.
I was so confused on what was going on the whole entire time.
Yep.
I'm like, what is going on? Like once it gets solved and figured out, it's like, oh, okay, now this all makes sense.
Which I partly understand it, and that is something that is like, this is one of those aspects that is a truthful adaptation, but a bad adaptation. It's like an aspect of the original stories that does not translate well to the adaptation.
Well, it also doesn't help that Geralt doesn't age, so you really can't tell during the whole thing.
Well, him and Yennefer, the sorceress, one of the whole aspects of their characters is they can't age. Yeah. Like they physically do not age,
right?
Which makes it really confusing, like you said. But the original books, they do, because they are a bunch of short stories, the timeline is not super clear on like what happens when. You just have a general idea of like, these happened approximately around this time in whatever order, because they're not referencing each other that much. Major event happens, short stories, again, all in a weird, muddy order. Major event happens, and then the third book, okay, now we have a continuous timeline. and through plot of the entire series. It's like, okay, cool. So I understand that aspect, and that does bring up like the whole idea of something can take an aspect of a novel, of an original work, and be a bad translation of that to whatever they're making. However, like I said, they also like to do the multiple perspectives, which is something that the books just don't do. The books are primarily about Geralt, the Witcher, Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf, my man, the boy.
Your boy. It's your boy, the Witcher.
And what they decide to do is my big gripe with it is that they end up following the three main characters, Geralt, Ciri, and Yennefer, in honestly a relatively even amount of time. However, what this ends up doing, though, is Geralt, by the time that this story starts, is not facing a lot of character growth. It's adapting these short stories where it's Geralt not really evolving as a character. It's just placing him in situations, facing these situations, and moving to the next town, killing the next monster. What they
the good life.
Yeah. What they try and
getting
do
with maidens.
Yeah. And then
cutting some grass, getting with maidens,
and then petting Roach.
And then what they do is then they try to, at the same time, explain the backgrounds of characters like Yennefer and like Ciri, and trying to show like what it is they're all going through before they ever meet Geralt. And what it ends up doing is you're placing all of the character growth and development that's happening in the story on these two characters that aren't even the main characters of the story, which ends up leading to them feeling more like the main characters of the story. The Witcher season 1 feels much more like it is, in particular, Yennefer's TV series, not Geralt's. And that for me, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way after reading the book, like rereading the books again, and just like I understand it. You want to make us more invested in Yennefer, and you got a limited amount of time to do it. I understand it. Don't like it. And I like the idea of just kind of like, for me, I think some of the best fantasy stories are when you throw the audience just into the middle of this world and just tell them, all right, cool. Use context clues and pick up the pieces to form what you know about this world. Not like, hey, we're going to show you the backstory of these main characters that never actually was talked about or like was part of the story, so that way you have a better understanding of these characters and the world. It's like, it's not how people didn't grow attached to this world and these stories, because we saw Yennefer's perspective of going through her sorceress training.
Right.
We didn't grow attached to these characters in this world because we saw Ciri trying to find her way through, like, after the
slaughtering of
her family and her friends, and the desolation of her family's kingdom.
Schmogue. Oh, sorry.
Not that one. Yeah.
And for me, a lot of it is just like, it comes down to just trying to take ideas from other successful series and throw it into a series that just, it doesn't make sense for it. And another part of Hollywoodification is stealing ideas. Taking ideas from other things that were successful and trying to make it into your own, to make your own stuff successful, which is fine. All of the best artists steal.
I'm Alex Steele.
Yeah. But the whole important part of like stealing art to make it your own is you got to make it your own. You gotta do something different enough with it to make it actually work for what you're trying to do in a different enough way. So that's really the main issue with season 1. To kind of go along with that, though, is like they throw a lot of bullshit in there that just doesn't exist. Like Geralt meets Ciri very early on.
The apple person?
At the end. Basically, yeah, sure.
Okay.
So Geralt meets Ciri at the end of last episode of season 1, which relatively in terms of like the TV series is fine. Like, yeah, that makes sense. But as far as like timing wise in the books, especially taking into account what all they cover in season 2, makes zero fucking sense. The whole idea of like following Yennefer through the Battle of Sodden, where she is and the other sorceresses are trying to fight the armies of fight the black armies of Nilfgaard. That's
Nilfgaard.
The one. Yep. Yeah. I was like, Nilfheim. No, that's Norse mythology. Nilfgaard. And yeah, you see some of that, and it's like, yeah, that's cool. It's a big action scene. Everyone ends on this really big bombastic note for the end of season 1. Yennefer uses the forbidden fire magic, and the last we see of her, it looks like she just vaporizes and is burned to cinders for using up all of her magical essence.
She did.
My gosh,
she did.
You get to season 2 though. Season 2. Oh boy, this is where shit really started to fucking piss me off.
Flying off the handle. So is this the final step? Have we made it?
No. The last one is going to be a very quick, because I feel like everyone at this point will understand the last one.
Gotcha.
We get to season 2, and almost the entirety of the first few episodes, especially, are following Yennefer, and they completely add in this entire aspect that doesn't exist in the original works of, because Yennefer used up all of her like used the forbidden like fire magic, she used up all of her available magical essence or mana or it's chaos.
Yeah.
Which is fucking stupid, because you don't even follow the lore of the goddamn books, the lore of the world that you're existing in. They spend half of season 1 explaining harnessing the chaos of the world around you, and then they jump right into season 1 of like, oh, actually she ran out of chaos, she can't do it anymore. It's like, it violates the whole idea of like, they're not the ones who have chaos, they're harnessing the chaos from around them.
But it doesn't even like, that was the other thing, is like they brought that into like, and then you don't even see her really use it for the rest of the time, like when she's doing stuff.
Well, it's one of those things, like it really has like, it has a huge impact on her character in the TV show. That aspect of her character just doesn't even exist in the books or the video games, because it's not, the entire plot point of her character in season 2 just doesn't exist in any other adaptation. And to go along with that, it just kind of like takes away from all the other cool shit that is happening when it comes to Geralt and Ciri. It's like they're going through some actual really cool stuff. Like Geralt has taken Ciri back to the place where all the Witchers go, Kaer Morhen. That's like where their home is, and is training her on how to be a Witcher, which is a very hard process. And like that part, that's all really cool. The first episode of season 2 covers my favorite short story. And this is why I said the timeline gets all fucked up, because my favorite story of the first book is when Geralt meets Nivellen in his castle. And that whole story, if you go watch the Witcher series, watch it before reading the books, you'll enjoy it more. It's a great story, it's a great part of it. But in the books, that is the second chapter of the entire series, and Geralt doesn't even know who the fuck Ciri is at that point. But he has Ciri with him in the Netflix series.
Like castle already. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But yeah, and so these are just 2 examples of like really weird things that the Netflix adaptation did that.
So,
I just want to point out too, real quick.
Yeah.
These aspects are also completely ignoring the fact that the actual Netflix series, just the writing is not that great. Like
it's Netflix, man. What do you?
It's expect? A Netflix series. I mean, it's generally enjoyable. It's like a very like diet fantasy series. It's more about the action,
it's easy to
romantic drama. It's a very easy series to watch. You don't have to get that invested into the world and the lore. It's like you just turn it on before you go into bed. You can watch it through.
Yeah.
As a big fan of the books, that's a disappointing take on it, because I want something that dives real fucking heavy into the themes, into the ideas. The entire point of the first 2 books is about a man who spits in the face of destiny and the repercussions that creates within the world. They only talk about destiny probably like 2 or 3 times in the first entire 2 seasons.
It comes up like maybe once in the first season when you're getting flashbacks.
Yeah.
And like maybe another time, like finally in the second season. And then
yeah.
It's
like basically like, okay, the main themes of the first 2 books that we're adapting from, no. Let's talk about Yennefer and her struggles in becoming a sorceress and her wanting to have a baby. It's like, that's cool and all. Her wanting to be a mother is an incredibly important part of her character. It's just like, we can just show Yennefer as this powerful person, this powerful character with these motivations. We don't have to dive through her whole backstory and take up all of this space that could have been used for the actual story.
Or developing,
for developing these aspects of the character that just aren't fundamentally important. Because at the end of the day, like, we still understand who Yennefer is. The Yennefer we meet at the end of season 1 is still a very complex character. Well, it is a very easy to understand character who has complexities to her, but the complexities are not necessary.
They could have brought her in, honestly, when she was at the manor.
Yeah.
And that would have been perfectly fine. And then you could do flashbacks from her like past or whatever to kind of get more
or you can do what the books do and talk about how her and Geralt have formed this like on and off relationship, and it's these other characters who know the both of them being like, when the fuck are like Yennefer's pissed at you. Where have you been? Like,
with what's his name, the bard,
Yaskir.
Yaskir. Yeah,
that's one of the other things that's weird. In the books, his name is Dandelion, but Yaskir's a much better name. That's one thing the adaptations did right.
Dandelion.
Yeah,
I'm glad they get some points.
Yeah, but yeah, and so that kind of is like my big issues with the Witcher series, and that is like, it's still a decent fantasy series. It feels uncomfortable to watch as a big fan of the books, just because it does so much of its own stuff. Hats off to Henry Cavill, who absolutely fucking carries the show.
Yeah.
That man has a passion for his nerd shit that's on another level, and you can tell how much he respects the work and respects the character of Geralt while he's performing it, while it feels like everyone else is kind of phoning it in. He does an incredible job, to the point where even the original author is like, if any of you need a picture of what Geralt is supposed to be, look at Henry Cavill's adaptation, because he did an incredible job at it.
Again, at least they did something right.
Yeah.
At least they did some stuff right. Now let's take a look at one of the most controversial fantasy adaptations that we've had in the last few years.
Oh, it's not the cartoon version of Legend of Zelda?
No, something
it isn't the ending to the Game of Thrones, is it?
Oh boy, yes it is. Something that has caused immense pain and anger across the entire spectrum of nerd fandom.
Pain.
And we'll also talk a little bit about the damage it's done across the entire genre. So I just want to say this first off. I fucking loved Game of Thrones. The first 4 seasons, especially of Game of Thrones, are a chef's kiss perfect adaptation of the books. It's not, they don't cover all the stuff. In fact, I think they do a good job at not covering all the stuff. George R.R. Martin sometimes is a really shitty writer, and he likes to just talk about a lot of unnecessary shit for his own, I don't know, just for himself, that just doesn't really have a huge effect on the actual overarching story, which is fine, but I can take it or leave it.
So this series, my wife actually read through multiple times.
My wife.
She did not finish The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. But she did finish.
Yeah,
the books that are out there. So.
Yeah, the Song of Ice and Fire series. Yeah, it's great. It's good. I would much rather read about the bark of a tree for 3 pages than read for 2 paragraphs about the way that shit feels on someone's face because they fell into it. I'd much rather read about trees than shit.
Fair.
The thing is, though, is like the books themselves do have a really big following, and there's very specific parts about it that are really good. They're great fantasy, medieval inspired political dramas and character dramas. You have the whole idea of having multiple character perspectives. I mean, it's not new by any means, but having dedicated chapters to following specific characters' perspectives across an entire continent, all following their own individual events, meeting their own people, and then seeing how those different paths cross across the entire spectrum of the story is a really fucking cool concept. And the TV series did a really good job of that, especially for the first 4 seasons. But then we get to the later seasons of this.
They got bored.
No, they didn't get bored. They got greedy.
Greedy?
Yeah. The 2 original writers, and producers of the show, they got the job by essentially having Hollywood was looking to adapt the series for a while, but they couldn't find anyone that George R. R. Martin would sign off on, because his one stipulation was like, you already have to be a fan of the books. You already have to be a fan of the books, and by being a fan of the books, the only way that you can get this job is by telling me about this one very important, guessing the outcome of this very important plot point. Have
to tell me how to finish my book.
Basically saying like,
and then I still won't finish it.
Yeah, it's like, you need to tell me how you think I'm going to finish this book, and if you guess right, then yes, you get to be the producers. And it was David Benoff and D.B. Weiss. They guessed right. They got the series. Okay, cool. They're big fans. That's awesome. Generally, that means that they are going to do a good job. However, as they got further and further on, and this is where we can maybe say, like, technically not an adaptation, because George R. R. Martin is he is the physical embodiment of the metaphysical concept of procrastination. Wasn't making too much progress on his books. And so they had to start trying to like take the ideas that they knew about how this story was supposed to finish and adapt those to the TV series. But what was it about Game of Thrones that people loved? They loved the character dramas. They loved how visceral the show was. It wasn't afraid to show gore and be what felt like a more grounded, realistic showing of what a political medieval drama would look like. It's going to show like, yeah, the men in this show are all fucking sick, like almost like either pedophiles or rapists, or like there's with only like one or few, like 2 to 3 like actual good guys within this. Everyone else is a piece of shit looking out for themselves. All the women are like manipulative and conniving, or they're innocent and you see their innocence be taken away from them. You see like all of the revolting parts of what this, like what we would think that this time period would look like. Granted, it's a fantasy series, not an actual time period, but based off of like the War of the Roses that took place in the medieval times. So there are links to our own time. But yeah, it's like, it was just a generally really interesting concept to see these characters play out in these different these different perspectives, and see them all come together and grow. We get to the last few seasons of it, where they're doing their own adaptations upon their own expectations of how the show is supposed to end. And God, they just got so fucking lazy. And I said it was for greed, and it's because the writers, by the time that the last 2 seasons were ending, they got a deal to write and produce for Star Wars, a new Star Wars TV series, where Disney was offering them millions upon millions of dollars to do this. They got like, there's a difference between HBO money and Disney money.
Yeah.
They got Disney money. But the stipulation was they couldn't really work on anything else and dedicate that time that they could put towards something like Game of Thrones until they were done with Game of Thrones. So what did they do instead of, being like, you know what, this is a series that we're big fans of. We've been working on this for like 15 years at this point. Like, let's take this to its completion. We owe it to all the people that, like, all the fans that we've inspired and that we've grown naturally through this, all of the actors that have dedicated a decade of their lives to this one series. All these people are super invested. Like, let's finish this out and let's go off on a bang. Let's do a good job of it. They're like, no, this doesn't sound like a good idea to me.
That sounds pretty expensive.
I want that Disney money.
Generally, I'm not one to attribute malintent upon people. You can go back and look at my cyberpunk episode. I think it's a shit game, but I defend those developers like tooth and nail. I completely understand where they're coming from, and I can completely understand why someone would make a bad game in that situation. I don't think anyone besides the board members had malintent. I think David Benoff and DB Weiss had straight up malintent upon this series because they wanted to wipe their hands clean from it to make more money from Disney. And the perfect examples of this are the way that they attribute specific parts of the series towards the end. With one of my favorite examples of this being when they are traveling from the place where they get all the dragon glass to King's Landing, to King's Landing, or to the place in the north, Winterfell. Traveling to Winterfell.
Yeah, I was like, what?
They are flying over the sea with Daenerys on her dragon. One of her dragons has already been taken out from the wall by the Night King. She's got her two left. They're her two babies, things she cares about the most. She's traveling. She's got all of her own ships below her with Jon Snow and like all of his companions.
Her cousin.
And
her nephew, not her cousin.
Yeah,
sorry.
her nephew. And then all of a sudden, the fleet of the enemies shows up out of fucking nowhere, and it's introduced not by seeing them come over the horizon, this like giant armada of ships that essentially blackens the sea wherever it moves, and then engaging in combat. No, out of nowhere, you just see a fucking spear be launched from a ship through one of her dragons. And everyone's just like, what the fuck? What's that? And then they turn their heads to the left, and it's like thousands of ships. Just like the logistics behind that are just like, yeah, it makes no sense. But then you get to like I can understand that coming from like bad writing, like the idea of bad writing. But then you get to what I think really shone a light on David Benoff and DB Weiss being just bad adapters and bad writers, which they would do shows after the airing of the original episodes when they were a premiere, where they would talk about the actual episode for like 30 minutes to an hour. And when it came to talking about that, they were straight up like, oh yeah, Daenerys just kind of forgot that they had those ships. Like they just forgot.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's like,
yeah, she did.
She did?
Did she?
Did she?
Is that what happened?
Does that explain why she didn't see any of this shit? Does that explain why she was so thrown off and just completely like she just forgot that they had like a giant naval brigade to come and just like basically tank all of their ships and sink all of them.
Do you guys feel good about how that went? As the writers, do you guys feel good about how that went down?
And it's not good. That's one thing that happened in the show that I think like really shows how bad it was. Besides the entirety of the last like 2 episodes, where
you mean how it just skipped time very, very quickly, and going point to point, like it was just like
there's that. There's the fact that there was no actual character build up to Daenerys going as crazy as she did. The entire character of Jaime Lannister being about how him. Like towards the end of it, it's about him finding who he is as himself away from his sister specifically. It's about him finding out like who he really is. Last 2 episodes, they straight up are just like, actually, fuck that. I want to go be with my sister. And just throwing away like 10 years of character development. But really what it all comes down to is, and this is kind of like what attributes to these feelings of things skipping around the place, there being no character development, having to make up excuses like Daenerys just forgot. The last season of Game of Thrones was a shortened season. Let me bring it up here because I forgot how many episodes there were in the last season.
I swear there was 8 or 9.
There were 6.
6. Okay,
there were 6 episodes in the last season. All of the other seasons had about 10 episodes. So they cut the last season number of episodes by half. Typically when that happens, that's done for budgetary reasons. Mm-hmm. And that was the original excuse. It was we didn't want to put in the budget that was going to be required for the insane amount of CGI and all of this traveling that we had to do for these different locations. It was just going to cost us a lot of money. What we find out though was that HBO had offered to the producers and the writers a full season. They offered it to them from the get-go. It's this is the most successful show in the world right now. We will pay you whatever amount of money you need to give this the good ending that you want it to be. They're like, no, we don't want that.
We don't want to, though.
We don't want that.
But we don't actually
want that. We want to go be...
It's we could tell this story in I don't know. 6
I could tell it in 1 if you'd let me.
Yeah.
Can we just
finish it up?
Can we just end this shit so we can go make Disney money?
We're gonna go make Disney money. Is that okay?
Is that okay?
Okay, I'm curious as to what episode or what TV series they did for Disney.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I can't tell you because they got fired.
Wow.
They got fired from being the writers and producers of this Star Wars show.
Is it because
they completely canned the entire series midway through development because they could not trust them to do a good job.
Wow.
And that's the punishment that a bad adaptation will do for you. Be faithful to your fans, kids.
Fair. Money isn't always the better thing here.
The moral of this this hour and 10-minute Aesop fable is don't do shit just for money. If you care about something, do it for the other people that care about it, just like you do. The money making aspect of it, it's a side effect. It's important. I get it. But look at Lord of the Rings. Look at what that did. It's a fantastic adaptation because it's faithful to the original source and it is faithful to the fans who love it. Do that shit. Do more of that shit.
They were going to make another trilogy to Star Wars.
Oh, really?
That's what they walked away from. And they said they couldn't do it because, get this, they could not split time between Star Wars and their new Netflix series.
And what was the Netflix series?
I don't know. I can't go all the way down this rabbit hole.
Wow. All right.
Yeah. So that's it. That's my episode. Find shit that you love. And if you like doing writing and producing of TV shows and you get to do it on a big scale like that, be faithful. Do a good job. Actually read the shit that you're adapting as a baseline.
Just as a baseline.
Yeah.
Just
the least you could do.
Go away from the source material. Don't do a Harry Potter. Yeah. Don't do a Star Wars. Don't do
it's one of the things I really hope when people are adapting a beloved series that they do more effort than I do for preparing for an episode, for writing for the show. Do more than just read a Wikipedia page.
Ouch. Ouchies. And our stock drops another penny. Hey, when we get back from this musical outro. This episode was written by Michael Savoya with additional commentary by Alex Steele and Patrick Frazier. Our showrunner and resident fact-checker is Chloe Price. Our theme music is Rush Bubble by Aaron Spencer, with interstitial music by DJW. Tune in every Friday for new episodes, and thanks for listening.